Friday night, a live stream, GNS3. Yeah, here we go. All right, so what are we doing? We are going to create some custom virtual machines inside of GNS3. Why would we want to do this? Well, that's pretty simple actually. Um, so the GNS3 marketplace has a whole bunch of appliances that you can download and then download the VMs off of those websites, but they don't allow for a whole lot of customization. So there is actually an ability to be able to run and create your own VMs within GNS3 using QEMU and customize them. And this is a great feature because sometimes these appliances don't actually meet our requirements especially when we're building large scalable labs. So if we look through here, so this is the actual appliance marketplace on the GNS3 website. There are a large variety of appliances. There are some that are useful as clients. There are some that are useful as servers, but they all have limitations of one sort or another. As you can see, there's Windows, there's an Ubuntu desktop guest, we've got Windows Server, Ostinato, which is a traffic generator. We've got, let's see, what else do we have? Ubuntu Docker guest and Cloud guest, Security Onion, so on and so forth. These are all great, but I personally like to customize some of my own stuff. And to be honest, some of these appliances, the source virtual file for them doesn't really exist anymore or isn't necessarily available. So with that being said, let's get to it. So I created a very quick topology here. All this is a cloud node, which is basically bridging, and the built-in switch node. Now, the problem with the built-in switch node, it only supports, I think it's fast Ethernet, so everything's going to be limited to 10 meg. But I'm not actually going to be doing really any network traffic other than possibly, SSH or maybe some pings or something like that. I'm not going to update any software. I don't need to download a whole bunch of stuff. So let's get this started. So if we go to Edit and Preferences, this is where you're going to set up the configuration for the QEMU VM of whatever kind you want. These just happen to be some of the ones that I have installed, but I want to create a new one. And we are going to call this, let's see, do we want to do Windows Server first? Do we want to do a Linux server, or do we want to do a Linux desktop? Let's do a Linux desktop. So we'll go with Ubuntu 19.10 desktop. It'll normally detect the QEMU or give you the default of whatever you can use. This is where you specify the memory. We're going to give this 4 gigs of RAM. This is important. So when you're doing the install portion, Telnet's not going to do you any good. All right. What you need to do is you need to use VNC. Along with that means that you need to have a VNC client installed. Otherwise, VNC is not going to do good. This allows you to actually see what the display output would be of the VM that you're creating, so that you can go through the actual installation process and configure things without having to do some, you can't use remote desktop to connect directly to the Windows box until after Windows installed. So how do you access it? Well, in this case, you do VNC, and that gives you access to that local monitor for all intents and purposes. We want to do a new image, and we want to create. The defaults are perfectly fine for this. You can use other methodologies if you want it to be compatible with something else. That's entirely up to you. So pre-allocation. So say, for instance, we want to give this a 100 gig hard drive, but we don't want it to actually use up all of that 100 gig on whatever hard drive the server's got that's going to store this image on. In other virtualization environments, this would be referred to as thin or thick provisioning. In this case, we're just going to leave it with off, which is the equivalent of thin. And we're going to leave the cluster size as default. You can go through and you can change all this stuff and get stuff optimized exactly the way you want it. That's up to you. But this is going to be just a real basic overview. It'll take the name of the VM that you gave it and turn that into a hard drive file name, but we're going to add on to that so that we know in case we also have an Ubuntu 1910 server running for some reason. In this case, 30 gig, perfectly fine. That will be more than what we need for this particular virtual machine. Click finish. That part's done. But we do need to go in and we need to customize a few things. So here we can set the number of CPUs that we want to give to that box. In this case, 1 is perfectly fine. This is just a demo. If I was building a server, like a utility server, I would probably give it more CPUs so that it can handle all of that different traffic that it's dealing with. If I'm building a Windows Server environment, I'm probably going to give it more than one CPU because, you know, it's Windows Server. You can set a symbol. I personally happen to really love these affinity icons that they've come up with. And we're going to choose client. You can change the template name up here. Here's where you can set the boot priorities. On this first install, it's going to try the hard drive. There isn't going to be anything there, so it's going to go to the ISO that we're going to load up as the CD. And you can also specify, once again, the console type. You can also set it to auto start the console. I personally don't do that because most topologies are too big, and then you'd have 8 million VNC windows running. You can set up additional hard drives. So say, for instance, you're studying for Red Hat System Administrator exam and you need to practice with doing logical volume management. You can set up additional hard drives and you can do all that kind of stuff. This is important because obviously we're going to need an ISO to actually be able to install onto the system. So I happen to have Ubuntu 1910 desktop right there. Now this is going to take a minute. It has to actually copy this disk over to the server, and unfortunately, because I just moved into the new house, I don't have all the land drops set up everywhere, so I'm unfortunately using Powerline to get Ethernet over to my server, which is in another room that doesn't have a drop. So this is going to take a minute. Hey Paolo, glad to see you join. So while we're waiting for this, does anybody have any questions about anything? So something else to think about is this is also useful for installing things like pfSense. So say you want to play around with pfSense and you want to build a bunch of different pfSense configurations. You don't want to use just one standard one. You could build ones with 4 CPUs and 4 gigs of RAM, or you could build one with 1 CPU and 2 gigs of RAM or whatever. And you can actually build topologies that are going to be different based on, say, for example, some of the models that you might be using, or whatever the production environment is, or the lab that you want to do in preparation for some certification exam. Almost halfway done. Yes, that's it exactly, Paolo. What you're going to do is you're basically using QEMU to interface with KVM to build the virtual machine. So KVM is your hypervisor, QEMU is an interface into that, and GNS3 is just at this point, it's a graphical environment for us to manage these VMs. I probably should just run a LAN cable to the room with the server in it because this is obnoxiously slow. Oh, I hate Powerline. But it is what it is. The joys of moving into a new house. Hey, Damon. Thanks for joining. Transfer faster. If only my will alone could speed up network transmission. Of course, I'm pretty sure that every network engineer would have that exact same wish. Made it over 75%. We're almost there. Fortunately, if we do the Ubuntu server one in addition, it'll go a little bit faster because that's a faster disk to copy. The good thing is once you have this on the server and you want to create another virtual machine using that same ISO, you shouldn't have to upload it again. Sometimes I've seen where it does it, and sometimes I've seen where it doesn't do it. So it's a little unpredictable, I think. But for the most part, I think you should be able to not have to copy it again, which is a good time saver, especially in this particular situation. Almost there, 95%. So I hope everybody's having a good New Year's. I apologize if my voice is a little rough or I cough during any of this. I'm recovering from being sick over the holidays, which was less than pleasant. If anybody's ever been curious why after it copies, you see it going through this progress bar a few times, it's actually doing a hash on the file and building that hash to store away. Okay, so here we can also specify the number of network adapters and the type. This is very important, especially the type. There are certain VMs that you build, depending on what the vendor is, that they're going to have very, very specific requirements. For instance, there was a post either, I think it was yesterday or today, on the GNS3 community site where someone was having issues with a virtual firepower management center. And I believe one of the problems that they're probably having is because it actually requires this Intel Gigabit Ethernet E1000 network card. But they may have had like the VMware Power Virtualized Ethernet being used. Another example is the VSRXs from Juniper require this VMXNet3 interface here. It won't boot correctly if you don't. So we select that. In this case, I only need one interface, but you can set as many as you want. Change the format of the names. That format of the names only applies to the way it's displayed within GNS3. It doesn't actually change the format of the name of the interfaces within the virtual machine itself. Very important. So on the Advanced tab, there's a check mark down here. It says use as a linked base VM. So this is what allows you to drag, say, multiple routers or switches and have them be based off the original same virtual machine. In this particular case, we don't want to do that because that instance only would exist within this particular project. What we want to do is we want to create a master template that we can use across multiple projects, that its base configuration and the installation of the operating system itself stays consistent and it meets that baseline, so that we don't have to go through and install Windows Server 2016 every single time we drag that node onto a project. So we're going to uncheck that. There's a bunch of different things that you can do in here. Like for instance, I believe that if you're going to try and create a Mac OS X virtual machine, there's a custom BIOS image that you have to add in order for it to look like EFI. The usage tab, this is just for you to put notes in case you want to list like what the administrator username and password are for reference, so that later on you don't forget what it was. All right, so that part's done. We're going to click apply, and we're going to grab a hold of one of these. Connect it into the switch. Nope, not into the text of the switch, but the switch itself. That will help. Move that down there. And let's go ahead and start this up so that we can install. We go to the console. That was not what I wanted. This one. There we go. So given a minute or two, we'll see that this actually finishes booting up and we can go through the install. So the nice thing about this is this doesn't actually require any video card processing on the server itself. What this is doing is this is running within the VM, and it's just using very basic graphics capabilities. So if you were going to try and build like a gaming VM to run inside of GNS3, it's not going to work. Just throw that out there right now. Don't even think about it. You'll notice there's a little bit of a delay when I'm moving the cursor around. Some of that is due to the inherent performance limitations on VNC, and some of it probably has to do with the power line adapters I'm using to connect to the server right now. So we want to actually install Ubuntu. And we go through the normal answer all the questions process. We are not going to download any updates because we don't want this to take any longer than it needs to. We're also not going to install third-party software. What do you have for questions, Paolo? Go for it. Yes, this is a VNC connection. Yes, there is once you get out of the initial installation. The problem is that during the initial installation, it's limited to whatever the graphics output of the installation software is capable of supporting. So Ubuntu traditionally is limited to a smaller size window. It doesn't actually scale out to 1920 by 1080. I think there is actually, I don't remember how to get out of the full screen. Don't remember how to do it right now. I think there is a way to scale this out in the VNC viewer itself so that it'll be larger, but I've never messed with it. I've never needed to have the installation itself be larger than the default. Third question, what about VMDK files or OVA files? Can't use those, right? I don't believe so. What you can do, if I remember correctly, is you can extract the VMDK or the OVA and use portions of the files out of there. Although VMDK might be possible to use, I'm pretty sure you can't import an OVA. But the idea behind this is that we're not creating, we're not importing a virtual machine that already exists. We're creating a brand new virtual machine. So ideally, you want to use a source installation disk. So usually it's going to be the ISO for whatever that particular operating system is, so on and so forth. If that makes any sense. There's nothing on the disk, so we're going to go ahead and erase the disk and install Ubuntu. Yes. This part will take a minute while it's, there we go. Because we are connected to the internet through the cloud node, it was actually able to detect location and determine the correct time zone, so that's good. And no, I'm not actually in Chicago. That's just what shows up for Central Time. All right. So we fill out our usual basic parameters as soon as my wireless keyboard wants to cooperate. Come on, you can do it. Okay, we will switch real quick over to the wired keyboard. Fortunately, I come somewhat prepared. And it's still not letting me type. What is going on here? Did I break it? Mouse is working. Yes, you can use VMware with GNS3. That's a whole different ball of wax. That's actually importing the the settings from VMware itself. Close that and start the console back up, and hopefully I can start typing. Why is the... You know, sometimes when you try and do things in the real world and you try and do it in front of people that are watching, things just never want to cooperate. I used to teach a networking class when I was in the military, and one of the first things that everybody tells you is never do math in public. This is very similar. See, back to the VMware question. Yes, you can integrate VMware virtual machines that are on the VMware of the client, I believe, of where the client is running. Okay, that's working. Tab key is working, but Shift tab is working, but actual typing is not cooperating. This is definitely awkward. I may have to restart the install. Why not? Yeah, let's just go ahead and restart the install. I obviously did something that screwed it up. So let's go ahead and reload. So I apologize. You're going to have to sit through and watch me do this. It's going to try and boot. Sometimes things just do not want to cooperate. Why are you trying to boot from hard disk? Okay, we'll play your game. That's fine. We can do that. Fortunately, we can configure the properties from in here, and we're going to have it off of that first. Okay. Let's try this again. There we go. Hopefully it's going to let me actually type this time. Did I answer all your questions, Paolo? While we're waiting for this thing to boot up. Okay, perfect. Glad to hear it. In reference to the VMware again, one thing that you can't do is integrating ESXi VMs in directly. What you have to do is you have to have VMware Workstation installed, connected to the ESXi server, and then you can start them from within VMware Workstation through GNS3. It's a little convoluted, but it works. most of the time. Hopefully the keyboard's going to cooperate with me. It's very strange. The tab and the shift tab were working, but actually typing letters just did not seem to want to work. Erase and install. Disk and install. Continue. And it's basically the same process whether you're doing something like a Windows install or a Ubuntu or Linux of any kind, or something like pfSense, where you're just doing the normal. It just will not type. What is going on here? Just that field? No, wow. Somebody just really doesn't like me right now because they are not letting. Oh, wait, hang on. I think it might have just been buffering stuff in the background. Okay, this is very strange. So it is allowing me to put in a password and type that in. But it won't let me type anything else in any other field. Wow. Okay, so maybe we shouldn't be doing this with Ubuntu right off the bat. This thing is not cooperating. So just to be difficult, we're going to switch over and we're going to create a Windows Server 2016 instead. See if maybe that'll cooperate with me. I've never had an Ubuntu VM do that for me in GNS3. That's very strange. So we're going to go back through this real quick. This, other than copying the ISO, this shouldn't take too long. Windows Server 2016. And we'll give this 8 gigs RAM. VNC. New image. Create. I would love to say it's not my fault, but you never know, honestly. We'll give it 60 just because. I'm gonna edit that real quick. Change that to, ooh, you know what? Let's not do the Windows Server one because that's a big file. So let's do an Ubuntu server and see if that's going to cooperate. And 24, it's more than enough. You know, I've never really had any issues with VNC with GNS3. Yeah, I can't think of any time I've ever really had an issue with that. Fortunately, this will take a lot less time to copy over. Still going to be slow, but yeah, I could probably use like Spice or something if I wanted to, but I don't have a Spice client installed. I do have to admit that, you know, sometimes Microsoft gets stuff right, and they actually did a pretty decent job with Remote Desktop. Next time I do something like this, I think I'll do it on the smaller server that I've got that's on the 10 gig network. That way I don't have to worry about this. Dead silence is never a good thing during a stream. And unfortunately, I can't think of enough things to talk about to keep the stream occupied while I'm sitting here watching it copy. At least it doesn't use Microsoft time for progress bars. Those are always fun. Although it would be nice if they said that they were actually doing the MD5 hash during that phase so that people don't question what is going on. So we're going to leave all that just the way it is. Not a linked based VM. Okay. And let's try this again, shall we? Hopefully we'll have a little bit more luck with this. It's text-based, so that should help considerably. Well, to be fair, the image that I just uploaded was only 889 meg. The Windows 10 image is like 3.4 gig or something like that, I think. Yeah, I'm gonna do an Ubuntu server install. All right. Click inside there. And we'll continue without updating the installer. This is not a class on how to install Ubuntu server, so I'm just going to go through this fairly quickly here because I've already wasted a fair amount of everybody's time. VM. Yes, I want to install OpenSSH server. That shouldn't even be a question. It should automatically install OpenSSH server. So this part will take a minute. Fortunately, it gives me a chance to sate my drinking problem. I drink a lot of water. So what were you uploading your Windows 2 image to? That server? Is it running like ESXi or something? Or, sorry, is that for your GNS3, I should say? Weird, every once in a while on my OBS I see a vertical scrolling bit, and I'm not sure why. That's very strange. But I don't see it on the actual GNS3 client. That's pretty annoying. Can you all see that scrolling white block that goes through every few seconds? So that brings up another interesting point in actuality. So you could conceivably install ESXi as a VM within GNS3 and build it as part of your architecture. Unfortunately, my server is not the fastest thing in the world, but it gets the job done. There's moments like this where I'm sitting here watching a spinning bar, trying to keep you all entertained and probably failing miserably. So think about it from this perspective. ESXi, when you install it, it's nothing more than an ISO, just like Windows 10, Windows Server, Ubuntu, whatever. It's an operating system that you load onto hardware. Well, you can actually install ESXi into a virtual machine that you build within GNS3 to have an ESXi host that's actually capable of running additional virtual machines within it that would take the place of an actual ESXi installation within a physical architecture. So you would have 3 layers of nested virtualization. So you could have a Windows 10 VDI running on ESXi that's being connected to from a client, but that ESXi is running within GNS3 on KVM, which conceivably you could be running within the GNS3 VM itself on VMware Workstation or ESXi. So if that's not confusing enough for you, good for you. I don't like the fact that the new Ubuntu server install automatically tries to download and install security updates. So then you have to manually tell it to cancel the updates and reboot, and that takes a minute. I did get a new toy the other day, though. So one of the things that I wanted to be able to do was capture video from any of my other computers. For instance, I've got a Surface Book 2 that I'm setting up to test the GNS3 VM on in VMware Workstation on Windows to help some people out and possibly do a video. So I was doing a bunch of research, and it's really hard to find a video capture device that works straight out of the box on Linux running for OBS. I got on Amazon, spent a little time searching, and I don't know if you can see it, but I came across this. And let me tell you, this thing works flawlessly. I plugged it in, turned on OBS, and it just worked. I was blown away because every single card and external video capture device that I had found, there was nothing but issues trying to get it to work with Linux and OBS. So I'm glad I found this. If anybody's looking for something like that, it's from a company called Pluggable Performance. And the model number is USB-C-CAP60. So there it is right there. Not that anybody really cares, but I think it's cool. And it works. So that's what's important to me. Okay, so we can just go ahead and press enter. It's going to reboot. the very first boot for Ubuntu server takes a little bit longer due to it having to generate all the hashes and stuff like that. So we're going to log in real quick. Well, I'm glad you care, Paolo. That makes me happy. Okay, so I want to see what the IP address on this is. So 1.68. So now what we can actually do is from our host computer that we're running the GNS3 client on, I can SSH to 192.168.1.68. So now I have a Ubuntu server sitting there running within GNS3. I could conceivably take this Ubuntu server and configure it and set it up to be an NTP server, an FTP server, SFTP, web server, Radius server, TFTP, I think I already said that one, syslog, and maybe even a Zabbix server. So now I have an all-in-one utility server that I can use within GNS3. So let's do something real quick. I'm going to power this off real quick. I'm going to show you that we can do multiples. That over there. And let's go ahead and delete this. No, really, delete. Why are you locked? I mean, you're locked. It's very strange. There's some weird behavior going on. I have never seen some of this stuff happen before. I wonder if I accidentally locked it. So I've deleted that, right? So now if I go in and configure the template and I do advanced and I change this to be use a linked-based VM, I can actually have multiples of these now. Now, one thing I'm not sure about, and this will be a good test, is whether or not this will generate different MAC addresses for each one. I have run into issues in the past where the MAC addresses for a linked-based custom VM like this have been the same. So when it tried to pull, when the other instances tried to pull a IP address from the DHCP server, there were issues. So let's see what happens. Okay, so this one is 68. This one is 68 also, which is very strange. Which makes sense, actually, if you think about it, if the MAC addresses are the same. So there is a way to work around that. Yeah, they all pulled 68 as an address. So let's do this. Let's shut these down real quick. We will go ahead and make an edit real quick. And we should be able to set this up so that we can get different IP addresses on them. So let's go ahead and delete those real quick. Anytime you're making changes to the base template, you basically have to delete the instances of them off of the topology within GNS3, and then make the changes to the master template and then re-add them to the topology. So I believe that if we put in just random, let's try that and see what happens. May also be possible that the cloud bridge node is causing an issue also, but hopefully that's not the problem. Okay. That's interesting. So this one actually configured its IP address. This one seems to be having an issue waiting. So we may run into an issue with that. Regardless, that the whole point of this was actually to just show how to build an actual custom VM. So as we can see, it actually works. I'll have to play around with it. Maybe, you know what, just to see what happens, let's throw a NAT node on there instead. See if that makes any difference. Because the cloud node may be limited to only having one interface coming across there. Let's try that again. Okay, so we've got a 122.76, which is within the NAT range. Looks like this is probably having the same issue because it may have the same MAC address. So I'll have to figure out how that works. But like I said before, you know, the whole point of this was to show that you can build a custom VM. I personally do this so that I can build one utility server as a Linux server that has all of the different functions within a network environment that I need. So a network management system. So I'll probably install something like Zabbix in there in order for me to monitor the environment. NTP server, syslog server, FTP server, TFTP server, possibly FreeRadius, all kinds of things in order to support whatever lab topology I'm trying to build, or even if I'm trying to build a proof of concept or replicate a production environment. That way I have all the tools and I can build all the tools that I need to actually replicate that environment as close to reality as possible. So, any questions about any of that? And does anybody want to watch me install a Windows server? more likely, watch the progress bar as it copies 5.9 gigs over Powerline. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't even want to do that. But for you all, I will do it if you want me to. Do this. Now I'm curious. Now I just want to see if I can make something work here. These. Nope, that wasn't the one. This one. Another one. Let's see if this will cooperate. Oh, you installed the server? You shouldn't have any issues, realistically. Now I'm curious whether or not it's going to pull separate ones, but I'm pretty sure it's still going to have the same MAC address, so it may run into an issue. We'll see. I am glad to hear that. That pulled the 68 address again. This one's still waiting on the network, so that didn't solve the problem either. I need to figure out how to get those MAC addresses to randomly initialize. MAC address. Oh, you know what? I can't use a MAC address of 00 of all zeros. That's not going to work. Try that again and see what happens. So it doesn't seem like the uses linked base increments the MAC address at all, which I think it used to. Or maybe I'm just missing something. I haven't tried to do that in a while. I generally don't do link-based VMs for custom VMs. I usually do purpose-built single instances. Yep, looks like it initialized this time. So that's a good point. So if you're going to do linked-based VMs, make sure that you're putting in first of all, valid MAC addresses, because all zeros and all Fs are not going to be a good choice. And this one pulled .69. So we have two different ones. So I should be able to ping the other VM. Yep, look at that. And I should be able to SSH to it. And there we go. Perfect. It's almost like I knew what I'm doing. Almost. Really. Don't tell anybody. Okay. So, any questions? Anything that anybody wants to see how to do that maybe I can help with? And the bad part is now I got to clean out all these VMs that may or may not work. All right. Well, I mean, if I appreciate you guys watching. If none of you have any questions, I'll probably end the stream here. Don't be afraid to subscribe and click the ring notification button. Yeah, Paolo, when you get to that point, you let me know and I will help you out. I'm planning on streaming again this weekend. I'm going to be doing some exploration of how the different networking nodes, like the NAT and the cloud, work under different situations, whether it's a bare metal server install, whether it's a VM running under VMware Workstation on Windows or Linux, to see how the different configurations will affect connectivity between different portions. Like on the community forums, there's been some discussion about being able to ping from or have network connectivity from the GNS3 VM itself to nodes within the GNS3 VM that are running on GNS3. I personally, I don't see a reason why you would need to do that. This particular person was trying to do some Python and API work with devices that were running inside of his GNS3 VM, but he was running on Windows. So he was having issues with Python and Windows, so he was using the VM and using that instead of having a Linux virtual machine running inside of GNS3. He was using the actual GNS3 VM itself to try and have connectivity with the devices that were running within the topology. That adds a layer of annoyance, and I figured I could spend some time just exploring and figuring out what the different combinations are and how they affect everything, and then write it up and put it on the GNS3 community for everybody to try and help answer those questions. All right, well, I think I have run my lips for too long as it is, so you all have a very good evening, day, whatever it may happen to be, and I will probably let everybody know when I start streaming again this weekend at some point. I don't know when it's going to be because I'm going to start night shift Sunday night, so we'll see what happens. All right, and that's all I have.